Cool. Yeah, I think that wraps up what we have for Learning Path. And next we're going to move on to the job market and community for blockchain right now. And the first one I'm going to kind of recap because I think Michael actually gave a really good answer to this. And it was quite similar to the first question in Learning Path, which is what kind of people were suited for a career in blockchain. And we kind of went into, we wanted to encourage people, even if you're not, you know, Vitalik, or you're not Dan Larimer or Satoshi, right, and working at the protocol level and hacking away in your basement for years on a protocol, right? There's a lot of other roles out there for UI UX designers, front-end engineers, back-end engineers, DevOps engineers, distributed system engineering, you know, all of that is part of the puzzle, right? And I guess I'll change this question a little bit. Instead of being about how many blockchain engineers and what type a company really needs, to kind of, and this was originally for you, Michael, like what do you think the forecast overall for the job market will be in terms of demand for people in this space, maybe over the next several years?
I think it'll be very high because just taking a macro view, a lot of interest and capital are pouring into blockchain companies. Even just in Silicon Valley alone, a number of companies have raised, hundreds of millions of dollars, and they have, 20, 30,000 square foot offices that they need to fill with people. And these people not only do, there's only a few people needed to actually, design the protocol and work on the underlying core technology, but then the other people necessary to maintain it, to build applications that use them, and also to communicate the value of those protocols and technologies to people. Right. So I think the job market generally for blockchain as a whole will be very strong over the next few years.
Yeah, I think I always forget about the marketing community people, but that arguably is going to be a huge portion of the hires as well, right? It's so important to have a strong community. Okay, this one's for Aaron, and this has to do with how to evaluate if a blockchain startup is a good one. And just to give people some background, Aaron's company, part of what it's involved in is actually evaluating the different tokens in the ICOs. So we thought this would be a good one for you.
Sure. Actually, we don't deal with many ICOs coins at the moment. Mostly, we provide information about coins that are more mature. We are gathering the information from the internet for every coin on the market, news, discussions, white papers, and stuff like that, and we basically summarize them and give you some idea of the sentiments and the trends and all that. Well, the reason that I started this project a couple months ago was like last year. I was doing it manually. A lot of people asked me how certain projects are doing. Should they buy that coin or not? Or should they participate in the ICO? And the usual methodology that I use was I go get a lot of information about them. That includes first I read their white paper, see if there's any really original in technical innovation. Surprisingly, many of them, most of them don't. And in the white paper, are they proposing a feasible, practical method, or are they just talking about academic stuff that really hard to be implemented? It requires you don't. You look at Bitcoin; it's very simple and something that someone with college level education can just replicate given sufficient time. Doesn't require deep knowledge in a domain. I also look at like if the project is really what problem is it trying to solve, or is it trying to solve the problem that they haven't raised enough money, or if it's the only problem they are trying to solve, it's probably not good for the rest of us. Surprising amount of projects are focusing on the return and the money-making aspect, and that's no good. and the sentiment, how people perceive this project, and when obviously any project that has a certain level of interest are discussed by people all over the internet. But what are they actually discussing? So it's always a good idea to go around and sample some discussions and look at the topics. Is it all about the number of times of returns that they can get in a few months, or some actual technical challenges and applications that it can build from this project?
No, that makes a lot of sense. And I think I can't remember if it was Michael or Z said it earlier also, just using the principle of, is this really solving a real problem? And it's kind of like you said, is if it's reasonable that it could solve this problem with this amount of funding. You have to take all of that into consideration, not just get sucked into the greater fool theory of, oh, everybody else is doing it, so I should jump on board. All right, so this next one's one of my own questions that I added, because I'm particularly passionate about this one in the marketing community. How do you tell if a blockchain startup is really solving a problem that's appropriate for the blockchain, that only the blockchain can solve, and it's not using it as a marketing gimmick? Like, even way earlier in the talk, I was saying I think the banks, while I appreciate they're upgrading their infrastructure and taking a cryptography first approach, it's not really using a block or a chain to do anything cool, right? So let's see, for this one, we'll go with C.
Okay. I think by and large, I think any project or any startup or any blockchain company, right, it's always the people. So I think that's number one. You have to look at the background, right? Like, who are the core team that's founding the project, right? Do they have the credible past history or the ability to execute on the idea? I think that's number one. That's just fundamental 101, right? And I think the second thing is basically, I certainly look at a lot of the project evaluate based on amount of the activities on GitHub, right? If they're contributing code, that means actually it's more credible than just I see their Telegram posts or their tweeting all day long, right? So I think that's the number two, is actual concrete evidence of execution, right? And I think that the third one is really more about, like, you have to internalize, like, what they're proposing, is it really economically feasible, right? Is it really decentralizing anything that normally could have been done with a standard backend database, right? I think that's always the number one question. It's like, do you really need blockchain to solve this problem? And surprisingly, it's such a simple question, but a lot of time, a lot of the project you encounter is like, well,
it's hard. Yeah.
They either didn't think about it or just completely ignored it, right? So those are the three kind of gates I usually kind of walk myself through as I'm evaluating different projects, and also our own project as well, right? So those are the way I think about it.
Yeah, just to add on to that, I think, to me, I look for, is this a use case which is better served by a network rather than a central actor? Because, a lot of things today are being served by central actors, but they might be better served in a network. However, to actually get a network to solve that problem, there's something we call the chicken and egg effect, where unless you have a chicken, you don't have an egg, and unless you have an egg, you have no chicken. And therefore, something that can bootstrap that network and create incentive alignment around different parties so that they are all interested in growing that network is a good use case for a cryptocurrency or a blockchain company. But if it's simply a piece of software that's used by a single company, then you might as well just sell the software because adding a blockchain component just makes it more complicated.
Right. But it does give them something to take to their boardroom,
right.
And everybody applauds, right? So there's a use for it. It is pushing development forward either way in terms of upgrading these systems. So the last question I think a lot of our listeners will be interested in is just to get some suggestions on communities, either offline or online, where they can interact with other people that are interested in blockchain topics. You want to start, C?
Yeah, so I think this is, again, kind of leveraging my own past experience from the past year and a half. For one, we have a pretty tiny group called This Week in Machine Learning and also Blockchain. So it's a weekly meetup that we actually, 10, 20 of us actually gather every week for 3 or 4 hours and really kind of have a high bandwidth, kind of a in-person conversation about some of these ideas and these concepts, right, and the latest trends and news. So I think always start with physical, because I think that's the most immediate, most tangible. Then you can think about how to propagate that a little bit further by having, let's say, any kind of a communication platform. I know in China, WeChat, right?
Right.
You know, and in the blockchain community, obviously, you know, Telegram, right? And then depending on geographic location, it might be WhatsApp, it might be Kakao Talk, it might be Line. So I think that's the kind of the next layer, right? And then I think the third layer is basically, there's obviously a lot of really active online discussion forums, right? Reddit in the US is very popular, so I think definitely encourage people to participate. And that's kind of the third layer, right? And then, but I think the most important thing is basically it's a kind of a input and output. I think any community you want to get something out of it, you should always be prepared to have some input into the network, right? And I think that in the long run, I think the payout is much greater. You learn a lot more, and also your standing within the community is also a lot higher, right? So that's kind of my experience in the past year and a half.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I always start with the physical world as well.
Right.
I think that it's easy to, join tons of Telegram groups or WeChat groups, but I found that the level of discourse in those groups can get very noisy. But I've always had a great time whenever I've gone to the Silicon Valley Ethereum meetup, or in Asia maybe the EOS meetup, are really big. And I think because when you have a lot of people that believe in the technology in a central environment, that's where the discussion and the conversation becomes much more value additive. Right.
And just to add one thing, like all three of us actually met through the weekly meetup that we created. Yeah. We all of us participated and all created, right? So I think this just shows you the power of like this type of physical community is actually very important. Yeah. So I think it's overlooked a lot of time in the digital age.
Yeah, and I think it's new enough that if you're not like in the Bay Area or a big city where a group already exists, you could start one yourself even, and enough people are interested in it, just start going a white paper at a time, right? And it gives you something to discuss and pick through. All right.
Yeah, in addition to the offline community, I remember like last year when blockchain wasn't that popular, I remember a particular community like called Blockchain Berkeley. So they started out by being actually the first in this region, because back then I was looking for communities in the Bay Area, like in large enough communities, and unfortunately there's no such thing in South Bay. There's only one in Berkeley, and every week or every 2 weeks I would drive all the way there. That's 1 hour driving. So they did it by like just doing some of these white papers or give some talks or lectures, give meaningful content to people so that they gather a lot of people together that way. And later on they started doing other kind of stuff like consulting. They started doing less deep dive of the white papers, so I don't go there anymore. But that shows like how one can start such a community like, from the very beginning. I also find some online communities pretty interesting. Like besides this Telegrams, and there's also tools that you can use. Like one is called Crypto Panic, so that they actually give a rating. People can actually react to each news article, and you can selectively like engage with some of these news articles. Some of them links to other online forums like Reddit, and so that way it's easier to find some topics or similar people that people who share the similar interests with you, and start a conversation with them.
Cool. Yeah, it sounds like there's lots of good options. Maybe we should consider getting a WeChat group started or something to get the online discussion going. But yeah, great, good suggestions. I know for me personally, Reddit's always been my favorite. I always feel like stuff is popping up on the Reddit feeds like a day before it ends up on the mainstream media. Yep. Also, whenever the crypto market goes down, that's where I get to commiserate and keep my confidence up. So, Cool, so that's it for our job market and community section. We've got a few tech-related questions we wanted to cover.